I'm going to use my old system for one half and the new Let's Resin sander for the other half. Hey, welcome back to my channel. It's Wendy here from Toonpish Crafts and I hope you're doing okay. Now I'm filming this well in advance because I'm so excited. Okay, I have not got the piece of equipment yet. I have not seen it. All I've seen is bits of description on a screen. So I've already created the pieces I'm going to use and I'm so excited to get this item. Let's Resin are bringing out a sander. Now it's a sander that sits on the bench and it also can be taken off and used in your hand. And I am so excited. It's about time a resin company came out with some kind of decent sander. And I have my fingers crossed for this. I haven't received it yet. All I've seen is pictures on a screen that it's coming. And I am so excited. So let's have a look. Hopefully by the time I'm filming the next bit, I'll have a sander. Now I have recorded the pieces that I've made for this video, but I'm going to skip through it quite quickly because it's going to be a lengthy video otherwise. I've cleaned up the bog standard square moulds that I'm going to use and I'm squirting them with silicone release spray. I'm using Let's Resin 2-part epoxy resin, standard epoxy resin for this. I'm using their mixer to give me a nicely mixed epoxy. I was a bit sceptical when I first got a mixer, but now I absolutely love just walking away and letting it do all the hard work for me. And with any mixer, you've got to scrape the sides and the bottom of any mixing cup because the mixer doesn't get there. So make sure all that epoxy is well and truly mixed. Then I use the debubbling machine. This is Let's Resin's debubbling machine and it is always fun to watch the bubbles come out of the resin. Even though it's been carefully mixed, really carefully mixed with the mixer, you're still going to get bubbles in there. So a degassing machine is highly recommended. And this Let's Resin degassing machine is a really nice size. Now I've got 2 jugs of resin. I want 4 different containers of resin, so I'm pouring some of the resin into 2 smaller jugs, making sure I've got one that is a bigger amount than the other 3. I'm going to use 3 colours and clear. I'm not a green person, but I've decided to go blue-green for these pours. I'm using green interference powder from Let's Resin, their chrome royal blue, and their chameleon powder in teal. And I'm going to mix a little bit of the powder into 3 of the containers, leaving one, the largest container, with clear resin. Now, as you know, I'm not a green person, but I do appreciate teal because it's a turquoisey colour and I do really like that. Looks like I've run out of the blue. I'm going to have to buy myself another chrome set of powders, I think. The red's run out as well. Funny that. Now I'm going to pour out some of this Let's Resin into the bottom of these 2 moulds. I want this resin to warm up, and if I'd had left the large amount in the larger cup, I may have got it overheated. So I've poured out most of the clear resin into the moulds, and now I'm just going to wait for about 15 minutes for this resin to warm up. And I'm testing it here, but what I'm really looking for is around 34 degrees. The thinner the resin, the smaller amount of resin, the longer it'll take to heat up. So that smaller mould is a different temperature to the larger mould, but that's fine. I just need it around 34-ish degrees so that the colours will stay more separated. So I pour in a little bit of the teal in both moulds and then I go for the blue. And I'm randomly putting the colours into the clear. This is my favourite part. I absolutely love random resin pouring. I love how resin works, and doing this kind of random pouring is just up my street. And then I pour in the ghost green into the larger one. I'm not going to pour the ghost green into the smaller one, but once I've poured that green in, I can wiggle it around with a stick, just in a random, no rhyme or reason way. And as I said, I love doing this random type of pouring. You really never know what you're going to get. And yes, it is just like a box of chocolates. Surprise every time, and nothing's ever the same. Two pieces from the same block will not look identical. I love that. Now I had some resin left over, so I did make use of the tiny little block mould, and I poured the blue and the ghost pigment into that one and gave it a squiggle. Again, I still had a little bit more resin left over, so I poured it into the larger one, but there wasn't really enough in this one. It only basically with every colour came up about halfway, but I didn't want to waste it, so I did it anyway. I can always use that piece another time. So the following day, 24 hours later, I can demould and have a look at these pieces. I'm really excited by this because I just love random colours. Now a lot of the mica has settled at the bottom, but that's fine. We don't have to use those pieces. We can grind that area away. I'm interested in what's inside these blocks, but we really won't know until we come to make something out of them. These are just blocks of coloured resin, and I love the way resin works. Absolutely beautiful, and they are going to be spectacular for what I've got in mind. So this is the Let's Resin 4-in-1 electronic hand sander, and table based as well. It has a stand, and when I opened the box I was really pleased to see a detailed leaflet on how to use it. Let's Resin do actually have a really good video up on YouTube, and I will put that link in the description box below because I really do think it's worth seeing. We were asked to watch it before we tried the sander out, and honestly it is definitely worth watching. It tells you everything you need to know, especially if you've never used any kind of sanding machine or polishing machine or grinding machine, because this does it all. As I said in the beginning, I was really excited to have a look and see what this machine has. It has a sanding pad in 2 sizes with plenty of sanding sheets. It's got a grinding block. That is very cool. And it's got a buffing wheel. Again, extremely cool. I've got the version with a USA power lead, but I've got an adapter which will fit fine. And I'm really impressed with how sweet and dinky everything is in this gorgeous Let's Resin blue colour. Just FYI, it's about the same size and weight as a Dremel. Very exciting. It has 2 leads, by the way. One is for power, so that you can use it running on a power lead. The other is for charging the unit if you use it as a cordless. In this video, I only use it powered. I didn't use the cordless version. I was doing one specific thing. And I wanted the unit in the base. This base unit has suckers on the bottom. And I've got a wooden table in my garage. This is all being filmed in my garage. And I needed to cover the wood because water and wood don't go. So I've put plastic over the top of the table. I then realised it needed suction. So I've got an old worktop saver that is glass, and the unit can be stuck with the suction pads to the glass. Perfect. The handheld unit clips into the base unit, and it sits in its own tongue and groove system so that it can't go anywhere and is secure in the clip. The rest part simply pulls off once you push down the clip, and the safety hood piece slots onto 2 little brackets. Each different attachment simply slots onto the shaft of the unit. It has a faceted shaft and exactly the same on the attachments. There's no annoying screws that have to be done up. It's simply pushing them on and pulling them off. The device turns on when you hold the on button for around 3 seconds, and when it's on, it's just one push to start it going. And turns off again with one simple push. For this video, I'm going to plug this unit in. When it's plugged in, you can see it has a green effect around the right hand side, and the 3 in the middle is the fastest power, 1, 2 or 3. If you take the power cord out, it becomes red, and that is using its own battery. It says it's got a full charge. You can see the dots at the top, it's fully charged, but I'm going to use it powered. As I have a plug handy, I'm going to use it with a power cord. Below the power button is the settings button, which gives you 1, 2 or 3 different speed levels. Now I thought I'd show you what I use usually to make resin pieces. I have a huge bandsaw and a rather large desktop sander. I have a lathe and a 3-tier buffing system, and all this equipment is not cheap. I have been very fortunate in being able to have these pieces of equipment in my garage. My lathe I absolutely love, and the 3-tier buffing system really works well with shining up resin. And I use 3 different compounds with the 3-tier buffing system. These items are what Let's Resin suggests using while sanding and polishing resin. You have gloves, you have a dust mask, safety glasses, water in a bottle, and some old towels. So going back to the resin, I think I'm going to use 1 block, cut it in half and use both of those halves for resin pieces. I'm going to use my old system for 1 half and the new Let's Resin sander for the other half. 1 block cut in half to make 2 different pieces with 1 resin cast. So to start with, I'm going to use my desktop sander, and I'm going to use the front circular disc with an 80 grit sanding pad to shape the resin block as I want. It does work quickly. It takes off the majority of the resin really quickly. This piece of equipment is essential for me. I've had this for quite a few years and I use it quite regularly. Now it does have a dust outlet, and it is best to have that connected to a vacuum. However, I don't have that luxury. I am wearing a dust mask. Believe me, you do not want to use this kind of equipment without protection. The dust from resin is not nice, but it is a really quick way of sculpting a piece of resin. 80 grit sandpaper on the wheel, on the front and on the top really grinds down resin so quickly, and that took me about 5 to 6 minutes. So let's see how the grinder does on the Let's Resin sander machine. This is their grinding block. It is designed for tougher jobs, but they do suggest wearing safety gear and using water on the wheel. Now just FYI here, because you're using water, you're going to get splashes. Regardless of whether there is a cap on there to stop splashes, you'll still get splashes. That's one of the reasons I decided to film this in the garage and not get splashed walls in my craft room. Just thought I'd let you know that. Now my first impression when using this was I thought it was going to move, but the suction pads on the base are really strong. And even though I'm pressing really hard on that wheel, and it is taking down the resin, it's not moving because those suction pads are really strong. I can't stress that enough, but you do need a solid surface for them to stick to. I don't think they would stick to wood. That's why I've got it on a glass plate. With the grinding wheel, I'm trying to film here in an awkward situation so you can see how it works. It's not ideal to use one hand, believe me. I wanted to show you how it works. So you push on the grinding wheel with the resin. Now, this works really well. It does take the resin down. However, I was expecting it to be a little faster than it actually was. The machine was fast. The grinding wheel isn't as grindy as I was hoping it would be. It did take a fair amount of time to grind down this piece of resin into the shape that I wanted. I was using this machine on one of the hottest days of the year. It was temperatures of around 35 degrees and it did overheat a couple of times. I just let it cool down and I carried on again. I used a lot of water to make sure the dust didn't go anywhere, so it is a lot better than a big machine blowing out tons of dust. It is a lot safer in that respect. I soaked that wheel in water, and although the machine doesn't like getting wet, it's easily cleanable. I kept going on this for about 40 minutes before I got to the shape that I wanted. And although it did take a lot more time, it was more accurate. I wasn't worried I was going to grind off too much of the resin, and it did what it said it would do. The finished piece was a lot larger than the piece that I did originally on the bench sander, the belt sander. But I had more control over what I was making. And yes, it did take me quite considerably a lot more time, but I could shape it better. I could take off little bits at a time and shape it just as I wanted. And to me, it kind of resembled shaping opal on those TV programs where they use the little grinding wheels to shape opal. I just thought, it probably would work on stone as well. Now I've got both pieces to the shape that I want them. I'm going to show you how I would normally sand these pieces. I'm not going to put you through the whole lot. You'd be here for quite some time. But I've used an 80 grit machine on the bench to grind this piece down. So the first sanding paper I'm using by hand is 80 grit. I've got to get out those large, deep cracks. So 80 grit to start with, I constantly wash it in water to get rid of the dust, and then I move on to 100 grit. By this point, I'm now getting out some of the finer scratches, and the first two sanding papers that I use, I do quite intensively. I then move on to 120 grit. This is still very coarse sanding paper. I use the type that is fine to keep dunking in water. It doesn't ruin it at all. It's like a mesh system and I love that. Now each time I've gone through a grit, I dry the piece off, I let it completely dry so I can see where the scratches are if there needs to be any more sanding. I then move on to 150 grit, and again it's still quite a coarse sanding paper, but this is where I start to use left and right sanding. Because I need to figure out what scratches are from the previous grit, I change the direction in which I'm sanding it. On this occasion I sanded it around it widthways. When you let sanded resin completely dry, you can see every mark on it. But it can't be damp because you won't see it at all. I was doing this on the hottest day of the year and it dried really quickly, which was a bonus. The next sanding paper I'm using is 180 and now I'm going lengthways. So when I dry it, I can see if there's any scratches left from the previous grit. I then go on to 240 grit and I do exactly the same in the opposite direction to the previous grit, so that I can see if there's any scratches left from the previous grit. I hope that makes sense to you because it's the only way I could figure out whether I'd completely sanded it properly from the previous grit. I then go on to 320 and by this point it's getting quite fine. But you can see here, while it's dry, you can see the sanding marks from that grit are all in one direction. When I go to the next sanding paper, I'll do it in the opposite direction so I can see if I've missed any bits. Now I've moved on to 400 grit sanding paper here and I don't have any mesh 400 grit, so I've gone on to a different type of sanding paper, but it's still wet dry. Then 600. 600 by this time is really quite fine and you are getting down to really fine detail sanding. And then I go on to 800. Now when I sand by hand, I pretty much got everything sorted by the time I get to 800 grit. And that's where I'm going to leave the sanding. 800 grit to me is a perfect. Sometimes I go up to 1,000 or 1,200, even 1,500. But on this occasion, I'm happy with the way it's come out at 800 grit. That took about an hour. So let's see how we get on with the sanding on the Let's Resin machine. To start with, I have an 80 grit sanding disc on the front. I've put the leaning rest on there. Now I do know out of experience that when you sand on a sanding wheel like this, you only use the left hand side of the sanding wheel. If you use the right hand side, the piece that you have in your hand will fly off into the distance. So just use the left hand side of the wheel. When I've gone right the way around that piece, I then change over to 100 grit. I lock it in and it's ready for the next level. That took about 6 minutes. Now this sanding disc has a spongy section between the sanding disc and the plate, so that you can put quite a lot of pressure onto that disc to get a good sand. You need to go right the way round as much as you can to get those deep marks out. The discs supplied are wet and dry, so again you'd be spraying those discs with water and splashes will go everywhere. But you've got to be careful not to get it on the machine itself. But I never did, so that wasn't a problem for me at all. So moving up to 180 grit now. I had more sanding grits doing it by hand. I used Let's Resin's own system and their sanding grits for this to see if it would give me the finished result that I was expecting it to. After all, the quality of the piece at the end is what matters. You're putting in a lot of time and effort to get a quality result at the end, and if it doesn't give you that quality, there isn't much point. So I was hopeful that this was going to give me exactly the same qualities I'm used to, but we'll find that out later. We're going to move on to 320 grit this time. This is the next step in the Let's Resin system, 180 to 320. Now I did wonder where the 240 was, but there wasn't one. There wasn't a 240, it went straight on to 320. And that's fine if it works, that's what matters. So going on to the 320 grit, just making sure that I went right the way around the entire piece each time I was sanding. I did wash them pieces off, I did check to see if there was any deep scratches from the previous grit, and I made sure that it was doing what it said it would do. There was a flaw in the resin there, but it wasn't a deep scratch. I can handle flaws, that's all part of the resin process, so you never know what you're going to get at the end. Life is like a box of chocolates. And if I did find any little bits that needed a little bit extra sanding before I changed to the next grit, I went back and went over those areas. Then I gave them a wash and a dry before checking that those areas were good. Also, it's worth mentioning, you've got to keep your piece moving on the sanding wheel. Don't stay in one place for very long at all. Once I was happy with 320 grit, I looked for the next one. Now, I would normally go to 400, 500 if I had it, and then 600. But with this system, you go from 320 to 600. That's quite a large jump for me. But again, if it works, that's all that matters. So there's less sanding stages to go through on this system. Again, I do exactly the same, keeping it wet, making sure I keep moving the resin piece on the sanding wheel, and then I move up to the next grit. And the next grit in this system is 1000. So from 600 to 1000, there's no 800. I'm wondering at this point, is it actually going to work? Is this going to give me the results that I want? Because the skip sanding discs, to me, is quite crucial. But if it does work, then maybe I don't need to do so many steps when I'm doing hand sanding. Again, I'm trying to film here so that you can see exactly what's going on with this sander. You're not supposed to do it one-handed, but for filming purposes. That wasn't a great angle, so I decided to change the camera angle so it was directly above my head and it would point directly down. So I zoomed in, and you can have a bird's eye view of how you would see it when you're using this sander. You do have to press quite hard, but because of that spongy section behind it, it just springs back out at you, and it gives you that security that you're not going to push too hard on the piece that you're sanding. After 1000, then comes 1500 on the Let's Resin system. So it's gone up past where I sanded with hand sanding. I only went up to 800, remember, on the hand sanding. So far I've done 1000 and 1500 with this sanding system. So it may have skipped steps, but it takes it higher. That is probably how it works. That to me is a good idea. Now the next sanding disc was 2000, and I actually thought this was the top one. This was the last one. It wasn't. And this feels very fine. If you accidentally touch it with your finger, it's not going to hurt you. As long as you don't keep it there, it's not going to hurt your finger at all. And I thought I was finished, but no, there was a 5000 grit as well. Well, I'm going to keep going and use this 5000 grit. 5000 is extremely high. This is such a fine sanding paper. This is more like a rubbing cloth than sanding paper. But if it gives me the finish I want on this piece, that is what I'm going to do. Each stage of this took about 6 to 7 minutes. And after the 5000 grit, you can see it's got a dull shine already. This just needs to be shined up nicely. So as I'm showing you both ways, I'm going to start by showing you my 3-tier buffing system on the lathe. I first of all prime each buffing wheel with the corresponding compounds that I'm using. You go from left to right, so it's a hard, a medium and a soft. No, not everybody's got a lathe, and if they have, they may not have a buffing tray like this. I love this. This is from Chestnut products, and I will put the link in the description box below. I absolutely love this system, but if you don't have it, what do you do? I've tried before in the past so many times to buff up resin with hardly any success. I bought a bench grinder and changed it out for a buffing wheel. Still did not get the success that I was looking for. This system works beautifully for me. Absolutely flawless shine on this piece. No scratch marks. Beautiful shine. It is quite static at the moment. That's why bits are attracted to it. But it is spotless and shiny, and I love this piece. So what about the buffing tool on the new Let's Resin piece? Well, there's only one wheel. Now you can buy more wheels. You can buy more buffing pieces. You can buy extra pieces if you want. I'm going to use this one wheel, and I'm going to use it with the 3-tier system that I always use. You don't have to use this. You can use whatever polishing compound you want. But because I'm used to using this system, I'm going to try it on this wheel. And you just hold it against the wheel and let it do its work. I did turn the power up to max on this one, level 3, because the faster it goes, the better the polish. It's just a buffing wheel. It doesn't hurt you if you accidentally touch it. It's like 1,000 dusters hitting your skin. Really isn't going to do you any damage at all. Obviously try not to, because you'll get polished too. It just runs that polish over the top of the resin. And I do exactly the same on this as I did on the first wheel of the larger system. I did put some more compound on it, which I don't usually do, but it's a brand new wheel and mine have been well worn and well compounded in the past. Then I moved on to the second compound. Again, I primed the wheel with the compound. Like I said, you don't have to use this system, but it is one that I understand and know. And I want to see if it gives me as good a shine as my lathe system does. And again, I go right the way over this piece with the second compound. Move on to the last one. This is the shining, the buffing, the really high shine compound. This won't take anything away from your pieces, just shines it up. And you can see it's already got a lovely shine on it. The lights on the room are reflected on this piece, so I think we're going to be okay with it. When I'm happy that I've completely gone right the way over this piece, then I rub it off with a cloth, and there are no scratch marks and it is beautifully shiny. As good as I would have hoped from my own system, the one I usually use. This is as good as that. So what do I think of this machine? My honest opinion is if you don't have all these big pieces of equipment, this machine is really worth getting. I've only tried it out in one way. It can do so much more than what I've shown you in this video. And it's really worth checking out Let's Resin's own video on this piece of equipment. If you have any questions about this machine or anything else resin related, drop a comment in the comment section below and I will do my best to answer it. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope you've got something out of it. Come back and see me next week because you never know what I'm going to be up to. I never know what I'm going to be up to. Have a great week, happy crafting, and bye for now.